What if the thing that's hurting you most right now isn't failure, but a deadline that never actually existed? Most people watching this right now have a number in their head, an age. The age by which they thought they would have figured everything out. The age by which they were supposed to become successful, build something meaningful, or finally feel like their life was moving in the right direction. And maybe that age has already passed. Maybe 30 came and went. Maybe 40 arrived faster than expected. Maybe you're looking around and quietly wondering why everyone else seems to be moving ahead while you're still trying to find your place. Somewhere along the way, the world convinced us that success belongs to the young, that if you haven't made it by a certain age, the window is closing. But psychology tells a very different story. In fact, some of the most successful people in history didn't find their greatest achievements until the world had already decided they were too late. And once you understand why, you'll never look at your own timeline the same way again. The first thing psychologists notice when they speak to someone who feels they're running out of time isn't a lack of intelligence, talent, or potential. It's a belief. A deeply internalized belief that human potential comes with an expiration date, that there is a window, and once that window closes, your opportunity disappears forever. Psychologists often describe this feeling as chronological shame, the painful belief that your age itself has become evidence against you. And it's one of the most destructive ideas a person can carry because it doesn't simply make people feel discouraged, it makes them stop trying altogether. It convinces capable people to give up before they've even discovered what they're truly capable of. But here's the reality. Before you assume success belongs only to the young, remember this. Vera Wang didn't design her first dress until she was 40 years old. Colonel Sanders was 62 before KFC became successful. Ray Kroc was in his 50s before McDonald's became the global brand we know today. Yet millions of people still panic if they haven't succeeded by 35. The problem isn't reality. The problem is the story we've been taught about reality. Research consistently shows that creativity, innovation, wisdom, and meaningful achievement often peak much later than people imagine. For many individuals, their most valuable work emerges in their 40s, 50s, and beyond. The idea that your best years are already behind you isn't science, it's a cultural myth. And unfortunately, it's a myth that has convinced countless people to abandon themselves far too early. Now here's where things become genuinely fascinating. When psychologists study people who succeed later in life, they discover a pattern that appears again and again. Late bloomers aren't simply people who waited longer than everyone else. They're people who used the time differently. Carol Dweck, one of the world's leading psychologists, spent decades studying what separates people who continue growing from people who remain stuck. And the strongest predictor wasn't intelligence, wasn't talent, it wasn't even early success. It was something she called a growth mindset. The belief that who you are today is not the limit of who you can become tomorrow. And here's what makes late bloomers unique. Many of them developed this mindset because life didn't go according to plan. Imagine spending 10 years watching people around you move ahead while nothing seems to change in your own life. Most people become frustrated, some become bitter, but a small number become stronger. They learn patience, they develop resilience, they build emotional depth. Colonel Sanders faced hundreds of rejections before someone believed in his idea. J.K. Rowling experienced rejection after rejection before Harry Potter was finally published. The years that looked like failure from the outside were quietly building something powerful on the inside. Early success gives you momentum, but late success often gives you wisdom, and wisdom tends to build things that last. But there is another pattern almost every late bloomer shares, and it may be the most important one of all. When people finally break through after years of feeling invisible, they rarely describe a lucky opportunity. They rarely describe a magical moment. Instead, they describe a shift in identity, a shift in the story they tell themselves. Psychologist Dan McAdams spent years studying what he called narrative identity, the personal story people create about who they are and where their lives are going. And he discovered something remarkable. Before the external world changed, the internal story changed first. Think about two people experiencing exactly the same failure. One person says, "I missed my chance." The other says, "I'm still learning." Same event, completely different future. Charles Darwin spent more than 20 years developing the ideas that eventually changed science forever. Imagine carrying a world-changing idea for decades while nobody around you sees its value. Most people would assume nothing is happening, but internally, everything is happening. That's what late bloomers eventually understand. Progress isn't always visible. Sometimes the roots are growing long before anyone sees the tree. And here's the strange part. The people who succeed late in life almost never realize how close they are. Many genuinely believe they're failing right before everything changes. Which brings us to what all of this means for you. That number in your head, that age, that deadline, that invisible finish line you think you've already missed, it isn't a fact, it's a belief. And beliefs can be questioned, they can be challenged, they can be replaced. The years you spent struggling were not necessarily wasted years. They may have been the exact years that built the strengths your future success will depend on. Experience, perspective, emotional maturity, the ability to keep moving forward even when progress isn't obvious. The real question isn't whether you started too late. That question has no useful answer. The question that actually matters is whether you're willing to continue. Because every study on late bloomers points toward the same conclusion. The people who succeed later in life are not the people who had perfect timing. They're the people who refused to let time decide what was possible for them. They kept showing up, they kept learning, they kept improving, quietly, patiently, sometimes with nobody believing in them. And eventually, the world noticed. So, if you're worried you're behind, remember this. Vera Wang was 40, Colonel Sanders was 62, Ray Kroc was 52, Charles Darwin was 50 when he published the work that changed human history. These aren't exceptions to the rule. They are proof that the rule itself was wrong. You are not behind. You are not too late. You are not someone who missed your opportunity. You're someone whose story is still being written. And maybe the biggest lie you've ever been told is that success has an age limit, because time doesn't decide who succeeds, decisions do. The question isn't how old you are, the question is whether you're still moving, because as long as you're moving, the story isn't over. And some of the most extraordinary chapters in life are written much later than anyone expects.